Decision to let citizens freely cross between East and West Berlin. Many Germans gathered with hammers and picks to knock away the divide that had stood for 28 years. That does it for today. We will be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for June 12, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. Yesterday, we reported Hamas had responded to the U.S. ceasefire proposal, and Wednesday we know the response, and it was unacceptable, says the U.S. Secretary of State. We'll have the latest on discussions that seem very far apart. Russian vessels are in the water off the coast of Cuba. Just an exercise, say the Russians, but an exercise in what? The submarine surfacing was not that subtle. During the heavy days of COVID-19, we all became experts in testing ourselves. Now there are all kinds of tests we can take at home. How's it changing medicine? And do we have any idea what we're doing? When we do follow doctor's orders, our prescription medicines may help us, but they're contaminating wildlife. We'll talk to the author of a study that followed the damage being done from the medicines that cure us. Plus, the world's economic powers are meeting in Italy. The Southern Baptist Convention votes down a measure blocking women pastors, but opposes IVF. And inflation is lower than expected. The Fed stays pat for now, but a rate cut could come before the end of the year. And we'll reflect on the playing and coaching career of Mr. Clutch, basketball great Jerry West, the NBA's living logo. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin with a report from the United Nations that accuses both Israel and Hamas of committing war crimes. The inquiry covers the start of the conflict on October 7th, when Hamas attacked Israel, through to the end of 2023. Hamas and other Palestinian groups are accused of killing and mistreating Israeli citizens and hostages. Israel is facing accusations of crimes against humanity, like starvation and murder. Israel, for its part, is denying the allegations, which do not carry penalties but might be used by the International Court of Justice or other international criminal proceedings. The report follows a UN Security Council decision to adopt a three-phase U.S. plan to stop the war in Gaza. The first phase includes a 6-week ceasefire with the release of hostages, including women and the wounded, in exchange for Palestinian prisoners from Israel. Phase 2 will see a permanent end to hostilities in exchange for the release of all other hostages from Hamas and a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. The third and final phase would initiate a major reconstruction of Gaza. At a press conference in Qatar Wednesday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the Hamas response to a deal includes some unworkable changes. And as the fighting goes on in Gaza, hundreds of rockets were fired from Lebanon towards northern Israel on Wednesday. Chris Livesay is in Tel Aviv with the latest.
U.S. officials are warning against what they fear could trigger an even bigger war in the Middle East. This after a shower of rocket fire from Iran-backed Hezbollah militants lit up the border with Lebanon overnight, sending Israeli families celebrating the Jewish holiday of Shavuot ducking for cover. Now, most were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome. It was all in retaliation for Israel killing 4 senior Hezbollah commanders. One of them was Taleb Abdullah, the highest-ranking Hezbollah commander Israel has eliminated since October 7th. Speaking at his funeral, Hezbollah's number 2 vowed to, quote, increase our operations in intensity, force, quantity, and quality, adding, let our enemy wait for us on the battlefield. Since October 7, more than 80,000 Israelis have been evacuated from the border with Lebanon amid cross-border hostilities. This is a long-sought ceasefire for Gaza hits a snag. Hamas has reportedly requested written guarantees from the United States for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Strip in order for them to release the remaining 120 hostages, pushing back against a proposal laid out by President Biden. A frustrated Secretary Blinken said Hamas could have answered with a single word. Instead, they waited 2 weeks and proposed changes. And as a result, the war Hamas started will go on. John?
Chris Lifsay in Tel Aviv. Thank you. Now to the Russians. Military vessels from that country are bobbing in the waters 100 miles from U.S. shores ahead of planned training drills in Cuba. Officials in Havana say Russia's military presence, which includes a nuclear-powered submarine, does not represent a threat to the region. The U.S. was able to assess that the vessels are not carrying any nuclear weapons. The last time Russia held similar drills in the Caribbean was 2019. Officials from both countries say the training is a, quote, normal part of friendly relations. But it is happening just a week after Vladimir Putin suggested he could give weapons to countries hostile towards the United States after Washington approved Ukraine's use of U.S. weapons to strike inside Russia. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin joins me now from the Pentagon. David, what more do we know about these exercises, and what's Russia doing in these waters around Cuba?
I think first and foremost, Vladimir Putin is making a display of his displeasure with the Biden administration's support for Ukraine. And this exercise was in the works before President Biden made that recent decision to lift the ban against using American-made weapons against targets on the ground in Russia. But for 2 years now, the U.S. has been doing its best to keep Ukraine in the fight, and now Vladimir Putin is responding with these exercises. Now, this is not the first time that Russian warships have operated in the Caribbean, not the first time they've made a port call in Havana, but it's just happening with a higher profile. They pulled in today to a 21-gun salute, and then they immediately put out video of the ship's arrival on social media. They're trying to draw attention to this, and they're going to stay here for quite some time. These exercises are supposed to continue through the summer, and as you noted, these are going to be larger than normal. They're going to include long-range bomber patrols along the east coast of the United States, and that's the first time since 2019 that they've done simultaneous naval and air operations. So this is going to be an interesting summer.
And how does the Pentagon, David, respond to this, or how should people think about the fact that this kind of danger is a little close here to the U.S. coastline?
Well, I don't think we should exaggerate the threat here. Two of those ships, the surface warship and the submarine, are designed to carry guided missiles, which on paper could reach targets in the United States. But the east coast of the United States is bristling with naval and Air Force bases, and I would think that anything like that from the Russians would just be very unlikely. I think what is more likely is that the Russians might come closer to the United States than they ever have before, just on this transit down to Cuba from the northern Atlantic. They pass just 30 miles off the coast of Florida. And since a U.S. Navy task force is going to be shadowing these Russian exercises all summer, I wouldn't be surprised to see some kind of run-in between the navies of the two countries.
David Martin at the Pentagon for us. Appreciate it as always, David. Thank you. The Federal Reserve did not change its benchmark interest rate on Wednesday. It will stay between 5.25% and 5.5%. That range, the highest in more than 2 decades, has been the same since July of 2023, part of 11 rate increases over the last 2 years, meant to slow economic growth to bring down inflation. Though Fed officials entered the year thinking inflation had been tamed sufficiently to warrant 3 interest rate reductions, data this year cured them of that optimism. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell predicted only 1 rate cut this year, saying, quote, "The economic outlook is uncertain. We remain highly attentive to inflation risks." Also on Wednesday, the Labor Department says inflation rose to 3.3% since last year. That's lower than expected and down from April. For more on this, let's bring in Ben Castleman. He's an economy reporter for the New York Times. Ben, good to see you again. Let's start with inflation before we get to the Fed. What do you make of this inflation report, and how do you think the Fed sees it?
I mean, look, this was unequivocally good news that we got today. Consumer prices didn't rise at all in May compared to April. They were up 3.3% from a year earlier. This was clearly progress. It was better than economists had forecast. It comes after several months of not so good news, right? And so the Fed is certainly being cautious. It doesn't want to declare victory here. But they've been saying that they want to see clear evidence that we're moving back towards this 2% target for inflation. And today's data was certainly a step in that direction.
People often cite high food prices among their inflation concerns. What did you see inside the numbers on that point? Or was there anything else that sort of struck you inside this inflation report?
Yeah, and I think food is a great example of what we're sort of dealing with here, right? On the one hand, we had very good news today. Food prices, grocery prices didn't rise at all in May compared to April. They're actually down over the last few months, and even over the last year, they're up only 1%, right? This is not a big deal. Grocery prices are not rising that quickly now. But they're up 25% if you go back to the beginning of 2020. And so, if you're used to going and spending $100 a week at the grocery store, now you're paying $125 for that same set of food. And so the fact that, they came down a couple of cents here and there over the last few months is probably not, for most consumers, going to feel like a particularly big win.
And you've set the context there correctly. So let me ask you this. The United States and the world faced a once-in-a-lifetime, we hope, economic shock with the pandemic. So where do you think that story stands now? There was a huge shock, and now the recovery is happening. Where are we in that story?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question here is always sort of compared to what, right? If you go back to the very early days of the pandemic, when we were worried about just in addition to the obviously health crisis, the just catastrophic economic impact, millions upon millions of layoffs per month, right? And where we feared we might be, we are vastly better off than that, in part because of very intense interventions by the federal government. On the other hand, right, there was a moment where it really felt like we had kind of come through that scot-free from an economic standpoint, obviously not from a health standpoint. And then we got this inflation shock. And that has been, much more severe than certainly economists had hoped and than many people expected. I think that the writing is going to come down to sort of what happens over this next period. Mm-hmm. If prices come back down, or inflation comes back down, if prices stabilize without unemployment rising, with some stability in the economy, then I think we kind of come through this period and we say that was painful, but we sort of made it. If we don't, right, if prices pick back up again, or if unemployment takes off again, if we get that recession that's been talked about, that's going to really change the dynamic about sort of how we think about this whole period.
And finally, the Fed signaled one rate cut for this year. There was once talk that there might be as many as 3. Help us understand that. Is that a big miss by the Fed, or is it pretty much in keeping with the possibilities, because you can never have super precision on this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Fed is in a holding pattern, and they've been in that for a little bit now. They're looking at the economy and saying inflation is still hotter than they would like, even though it has come down. The economy as a whole looks relatively solid, and so they see very little reason to go ahead and cut rates. They'd like to see inflation come down more before they do so, but they're also prepared to act more quickly. They say one cut this year, but that is by no means set in stone. If we started to see the economy deteriorate, or if we saw better news on inflation, then they could cut rates sooner, they could cut rates by more.
Ben Castleman with the New York Times. Grateful as always, Ben. Thank you. The House voted Wednesday to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress.
On this vote, the yeas are 216, the nays are 207. The resolution is adopted.
The Republicans seek to punish Garland for refusing to hand over audio recordings of the president's conversation with the special counsel who investigated Biden's handling of classified documents. A transcript was made available, but the White House claimed executive privilege over the audio, which Garland went on to say could be used to make deepfakes of the president's voice. In a statement, Garland said, quote, "It is deeply disappointing that this House of Representatives has turned a serious congressional authority into a partisan weapon. Since Garland's department would have to enforce the contempt finding, nothing official will come of this House vote." The leaders of 7 of the world's largest economies are set to meet in Italy. Ahead, the agenda for the upcoming summit and the Biden administration's preemptive message to Russia and China. Plus, at-home tests for various medical conditions are becoming increasingly popular. What's driving that? We'll discuss that. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
A digest of some foreign news. The European Commission says it will begin imposing additional tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles imported into the EU. Starting in July, Chinese EV automakers will be taxed up to 38%. That's on top of the bloc's existing 10% import tariff on these vehicles, bringing the highest overall rate close to 50%. The decision to hike tariffs stems from an EU investigation. It concluded Chinese electric vehicle makers are purposefully lowering the cost of their cars to hurt their European competition. The World Bank says India is on track to remain the fastest-growing economy in the world. It predicts the country's gross domestic product will increase by 6.6% in fiscal year 2025. The UN's energy watchdog warns that a U.S.-led surge in global oil production is expected to cause a major surplus by the end of the decade. The International Energy Agency forecasts oil production will hit its peak of nearly 106 million barrels per day by 2030. The watchdog says supply is outweighing demand as more countries move towards low-emission energy sources. The surplus could also affect OPEC Plus's ability to manage crude oil prices, ultimately leading to lower prices. The most powerful people in their respective countries are about to meet face-to-face in Italy. Leaders from the 7 major democracies, that's the United States, Canada, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Japan, are gathering for the annual G7 summit. Allied nations are also invited. President Biden is already there. He arrived in southern Italy Wednesday, one day before the summit officially kicks off. On the agenda this year, talks on development in Africa, climate change, wars in the Middle East and Ukraine, migration, and economic security. Pope Francis will be there to lead discussions on artificial intelligence. Also expected a joint statement on China's aggressive manufacturing tactics. Before a meeting with friends, the United States is calling out its adversaries. The Department of State and Treasury imposed hundreds of sanctions Wednesday on foreign entities believed to be helping Russia's war effort in Ukraine, including some Chinese firms. During the COVID-19 pandemic, at-home tests became a convenient tool for many households across the country. As healthcare landscapes continue to change, the demand for at-home diagnostic tests is reaching new levels. More consumers than ever are now comfortable with self-collection samples for different reasons. According to the healthcare and medical device company Abbott, 97% of medical supply chain professionals have seen an increase in demand for home testing since 2021. The at-home testing industry is expected to be worth about $2 billion by 2025. For more, let's bring in CBS News reporter Nydia Cavazos. Nydia, good to have you with us. What are some of the main drivers behind the rise of this do-it-yourself movement?
John, we're talking about a booming industry when it comes to the at-home test. There are several companies, including Silicon Valley startups, that are offering Americans tests ranging from tests that offer binary results, positive and negative, from COVID pregnancy tests up to cancer screenings, Alzheimer's, ADHD, some STDs as well. And they're overall offering Americans an alternative to the conventional medical process. We're often told to go to the doctors when we have a health issue. We spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars trying to find a diagnosis. But with these startups, they're trying to offer Americans an alternative. And now, one of the most important factors here, and probably the most important underlying factor, is that there continues to be a lack of access to affordable health care. So this leaves everyday Americans trying to, find an alternative, and hence these at-home tests. So people are trying to do it themselves when they can't afford it. But how does that blur the lines between what they would normally get, and are there consequences? What I say normally, I mean blur the lines with medical care, and what are some of the consequences of maybe depending too much on these home tests? Well, I talked to a medical expert this morning, Dr. Irigel from Brooklyn, and he sort of walked me through, the pros and cons to these at-home tests. And on one hand, while, it is we can welcome innovation and new ways to find an answer to these health issues, he also walked me through some of the consequences and just overall cons to these at-home tests. And this includes, of course, that Americans are going to be paying for these at-home tests. They're going to get results, but oftentimes these results are often complicated and may not be easy to interpret for the everyday American, and they do require some sort of, degree of medical expertise to be able to understand. And a lot of this also stems from, the distrust that many Americans have with their doctors, with an inability to be able to get a diagnosis on time and treatment that is actually affordable. So while this doctor does welcome this innovation, he does remind us that we need to take precaution whenever there's some type of innovation. He reminds us that there's always predatory players and who might be trying to sell The everyday consumer with tests that are not necessarily needed and are far away from the actual problem.
Nydia Cavazos, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you, John.
Voters in North Dakota have approved a new rule that sets an age limit for their elected representatives. The ballot measure was part of the state's primary voting on Tuesday. It bars anyone who is or would turn 81 years old during their term from running for Congress for North Dakota. The measure will likely face legal challenges. A nearly 3-decade-old Supreme Court ruling says states cannot add eligibility rules beyond what is in the Constitution, which only mentions minimum age requirements. And while age may be a factor in politics, a growing number of actors making headlines in their 90s, are proving that you can't outgrow talent. For Dick Van Dyke, aging is just a step in time. The 98-year-old made history Monday as the oldest daytime Emmy Award winner ever. As you can see, despite walking with a cane, he danced down the red carpet. June Squibb is making her debut as the star of an action film at age 94. Thelma will be in theaters later this month, and Mel Brooks received a Peabody Award Sunday at age 97. The beloved filmmaker has now achieved so-called PEGOT status, as he has also collected an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony. Although I've never been, I'd imagine spending time in outer space changes your perspective on the world. Data published Tuesday finds that it can also cause physical and mental changes. In September of 2021, the Inspiration 4 mission sent 4 non-astronauts into orbit for 3 days. During that time, they participated in medical studies, allowing researchers to collect DNA samples during and after the trip. That research was published this week. It found DNA age markers in all 4 members grew longer in space, making them technically biologically younger. Those markers returned to their normal sizes once back on Earth. It also found signs of stressed immune systems and modest declines in cognitive tests. While the data proves new insight, it also shows us how much we still have to learn about human health implications of space travel. If you want to understand the battleground states, ask the people who live there. Coming up, we'll take a closer look at Michigan and parts of the state that get lost in some of the political commentary. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Hamas has proposed numerous changes to a ceasefire proposal. He did not detail the exact changes, but said some were unworkable. Russian warships and a nuclear-powered submarine arrived in Cuban waters Wednesday ahead of planned military exercises. The long-planned exercises in the Caribbean come less than 2 weeks after the U.S. authorized Ukraine to use American weapons to strike inside Russia. U.S. officials say there's no direct threat. The Federal Reserve left interest rates unchanged Wednesday. The Fed has been hesitant to cut rates due to inflation. Earlier, the government announced consumer prices in May rose 3.3% year over year. In the run-up to the 2024 election, you're going to hear a lot about the battleground state of Michigan. Donald Trump won the state in 2016. Joe Biden won it in 2020. But like all parts of the country, there is much more to the story. The Detroit Free Press took a closer look at 8 counties that it believes represent the varied lived experiences of the state's 10 million people. Emily Lawler joins me now. She's the state government and politics editor at the Detroit Free Press. Thanks so much for being with us. Why these 8 counties?
Yeah, we really wanted to get at a representative swath of Michigan voters. I think that any Midwestern state sort of runs the risk of being painted in a monolith or as flyover country, but we wanted to reflect sort of the diversity and experiences of our readers. So, you'll see Wayne County on the list. That's where Detroit is located. That's where I'm sitting now. Certainly a huge, diverse, populous county. But you'll see places like Newaygo County, which is a rural area, but not a farming community. So, we tend to sort of think of those things going hand in hand, but it's more a collection of small cities. And then you'll see things like Schoolcraft County, where, things that we don't think of every day as big issues like access to grocery stores and childcare are a lot more relevant in a truly rural area in our Upper Peninsula. And we just kind of wanted to capture and reflect all of that and make sure that our readers saw themselves in our pages.
And so if readers are seeing themselves in your pages, one of the things you're fighting against is people like me and the political coverage, which tends to sort of treat everybody by their poll numbers. And that's true of campaigns, too. How does the outreach from the Biden and Trump campaigns line up with those areas of focus that you mentioned in these various counties?
Yeah, I think we've seen some really big strides for the campaigns to try to court every corner of Michigan. That's true of both campaigns. We saw Jill Biden go to the Upper Peninsula recently, which is, the Upper Peninsula is a very deep place to campaign. I think the population of the whole peninsula is about 300,000 people out of 10 million in Michigan. And then, we've seen Wayne County be a real focus. Joe Biden has done some speeches here. He did one a couple weeks ago. And Donald Trump will be here at Huntington Place this weekend and also meeting with some leaders at a church. So, we have seen candidates target these places. I think they're targeting everywhere. Saginaw's been popular. Both Trump and Biden have been to Saginaw County this campaign cycle. So, we're getting some early indications that the kind of places we're interested in, the candidates are interested in too.
And we, as I mentioned, we're going to hear a lot about Michigan. We've already heard a lot about what gets misunderstood as people who don't live in Michigan think about what gets misunderstood when about the makeup of the state.
I mean, I think we have a really well-deserved reputation as a purple state. For a lot of years, we were mischaracterized as a blue state, I think, just because we always went blue in presidential elections for a solid 30 or 40 years there. But at the same time, we had this weird phenomenon where off years, Republicans had a really good chance, right? Our midterms were putting into statewide office Republican leadership sort of across the board for a while, even while during presidential years, Michiganders were voting for Democrats. So I really think that, people change. It's not just, it's a little bit, obviously it has to do with who comes out to vote, but I've talked to plenty of voters, even this cycle, who voted for one candidate in one election and are going to vote for another in this election. And of course, that's pretty stark this year with the presumably the exact same ticket.
And finally, what do those voters say about the way in which people put them into these various boxes? It seems like the entire project is to kind of recognize the individual lives that are a part of a campaign where everything is kind of aggregated. What do you hear from voters about that process of being kind of put in these boxes and spoken of in aggregate terms when they have specific lives they lead?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we're fighting with this project, is really trying to get at the nuances of a voter's experience. And by taking people who have had different life experiences that lead them to the polls in different ways, I'm hoping that we're getting sort of beyond the headlines and into people's real reflective experiences of being a Michigander. And there's so many great things about our state. And, there are so many people who make their livings in different ways, who interact with different groups of people, who have different communities, who have different concerns. And I really do think that once you start putting people into neat little boxes or questions on polls, you lose some of the character and some of what makes Michigan such a unique place that I'm very glad is getting the attention it deserves this cycle.
Emily Lawler with the Detroit Free Press. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
6 years after the deadly Parkland school shooting in Florida, the building where the massacre took place is being demolished. On Thursday, crews will begin taking down the building. It's been a painful reminder of the tragedy, but it couldn't be torn down before because it was evidence in the gunman's trial. He will spend life in prison without parole for the 2018 shooting, which left 17 people dead. The building demolition process is expected to last several weeks, with officials hoping it will be done before the new school year. More than 1,300 miles away from Parkland, Florida, is Newtown, Connecticut, where 11 and a half years ago, one of the deadliest massacres of children in the United States took place. Now, survivors of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting have graduated high school. Many of them are also activists who use their voice and experience to speak out against gun violence. They held a rally the day before Wednesday's commencement. 21st graders and 6 faculty members were killed in the shooting. The Southern Baptist Church's official doctrine states only men shall hold the office of pastor, but some members wanted to go a step further and put a constitutional ban on women holding the title of pastor. Those efforts failed Wednesday. Thousands of delegates voted at the Southern Baptist Convention in Indianapolis this week. Some major proposals did succeed, including a formal opposition to IVF. CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano has more.
Good evening, John. Well, this is a momentous occasion here. On the one hand, the vote to ban women pastors did not pass. That was something that passed last year, and in order for it to go into effect, to be implemented for churches to be perhaps targeted, investigated, de-fellowshipped if they had women pastors, it required a 2/3 majority of a vote today. But the big news here is that the Southern Baptist Convention has now voiced opposition to the use of IVF. What they're saying is, look, this is a resolution. It's non-binding. It doesn't mean that our members are going to be in any way shunned if they have used IVF, but it encourages their followers, their congregants, to either adopt children or adopt existing frozen embryos. They are standing against IVF because of how the practice actually uses and then discards embryos that are non-viable. We heard from people who support IVF, who have used IVF, who stood up in favor of IVF, and in opposition to the amendment or to the resolution, and they were saying, look, we intend to use all of these embryos. We acknowledge or we say that they are human, but we don't intend to discard them, and so we hope to have the support of our church. That's not what happened, and in effect, the Southern Baptist Convention is now saying, look, embryos that are the result of IVF are people, and we oppose the use of the treatment in general. This was done, of course, following what happened in Alabama and those bills that we can expect to see in other states too. John?
Lilia Luciano, thank you. It's shaping up to be a wet week for Florida as tropical downpours hit the state. To take a look at this footage here showing Sarasota's main street underwater. The National Weather Service warned people to stay home and not travel. A flash flood warning was issued for parts of the Gulf Coast, and the risk of flooding remains strong, especially in the Miami-Dade area. Here's Mike Bettis from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Major rain event playing out across South Florida today, seriously hampering air travel, road travel. Portions of I-95 at times shut down, and many cancellation delays out of Fort Lauderdale as well as Miami. But you can see we still have isolated areas of up to a foot of rain still to go, but widespread areas in South Florida of at least 3 to 5 more inches of rain in our forecast. Lesser amounts the farther north you go through the state. Other areas we're watching for severe weather, including the Midwest now. Through tonight, going to watch some areas here, especially in Minnesota, Wisconsin, the UP of Michigan for large hail 2 inches in diameter or greater. That area lays down flat across the Midwest, including Chicago, as we go into Thursday. The rest of the country experiencing very warm conditions as high pressure dominates. Weekend and after is really hot, hottest temperatures of the season so far. 96 in Cincinnati, 95s from Chicago to Detroit to Pittsburgh, and we could be staring at 100-degree heat index temperatures as well. And for more in-depth coverage, you can always check us out on the Weather Channel and now live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Mike Bettis, thank you. Over the years, we've made incredible strides in the fields of medicine and pharmacology, but at what cost? Coming up, we'll speak to the author of a study that found an increasing amount of wildlife damage as a result of drug pollution. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go.
You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this?
Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
When it comes to harmful pollution, many people may think of cars or big factories, but they might not consider the harmful effects in their own medicine cabinets. A new study from 17 international scientists found that active pharmaceutical ingredients, the part of our medications that help make them effective, are having increasingly negative effects on animals and ecosystems across the world. The authors are calling on drug makers to design more sustainable products with environmental effects in mind. One of the authors of that study, Karen Kidd, joins us from Ontario, Canada. She is also the Jaroslawski Chair of Environment and Health at McMaster University. Thank you so much for joining us. So how exactly are pollutants from drugs reaching the wildlife habitats, and how widespread is that problem?
Well, this is definitely a global concern for our lakes and rivers. So we've looked for pharmaceuticals in rivers in over 100 countries, and wherever people are taking drugs for their health and well-being, we find them in our rivers and lakes. And it's especially a concern in developing countries or low to middle income countries where they don't have the wastewater treatment that we have in the US or Canada. So that's where we find dozens of different pharmaceuticals, and sometimes they're at levels that can impact wildlife, as you mentioned. So what happens is people are taking all these different drugs to control diseases, disorders, and we don't completely metabolize them. So we excrete them, we flush them down the toilet or wash them down the drain, and they go to our wastewater treatment plants, hopefully, but those plants aren't designed to degrade these pharmaceuticals. So they end up getting into our rivers and lakes and having impacts on the wildlife.
Wow. And so what are some of those effects that researchers have seen?
Well, it's really fascinating and sobering at the same time, because these drugs are designed to have effects in our bodies and, help us with diseases and disorders or improve our well-being. And so they're very biologically active in our bodies. But because fish, birds, other wildlife are quite similar physiologically or biologically to humans, even the small amounts of pharmaceuticals that we use can affect fish reproduction, fish behaviors, survival. We know that drugs we take to control our lipids, for example, can change lipids in fish. We know that the hormones that we use to control our reproduction can control reproduction in fish. So there's a lot of similarities between our systems in terms of how pharmaceuticals can affect aquatic life.
And the report, one of the suggestions in the report is a call for more sustainable pharmaceuticals. What does that look like?
Well, this is an issue, it's a global issue that's going to take a village to solve. So you and I, we can make sure that any unused medications aren't flushed down the toilet or down the drain. They need to go back to the pharmacies for proper disposal. And we know local and federal governments need to ensure that wastewaters are treated using the latest technologies, because when we do that, when we treat them with the latest technologies, we can remove pharmaceuticals from the effluents. But as we develop new drugs, we need to really think much more about the environmental consequences of these drugs. So we want to make sure that drugs are designed to be benign. So that means that even though they're effective for treating whatever headaches or whatever other conditions we want to use them for, we want to put drugs on the marketplace that are less persistent in our environment, less harmful to our fish and other wildlife.
Is it difficult? Is it better to fix the problem at the head end, as it were, because if you can't do enough at the wastewater treatment plant end. Is that the case, or could you install? Are there limitations to what you could do at the wastewater treatment plants?
There are definitely. I mean, the wastewater treatment plants aren't designed to remove these kinds of contaminants. They're designed to remove, noxious things like ammonia. But the great news is that when you bring the latest technologies in to remove ammonia, you have a co-benefit of also removing pharmaceuticals. But as you said, it's much easier to solve this problem at the source, to make sure that we bring new pharmaceuticals onto the market that are greener, that are more sustainable, that don't impact, like antibiotics can impact bacteria that are really not quite important in our soils and water for food production and for water quality purification. So we want to make sure that we're not releasing pharmaceuticals to the environment that are having these kinds of harmful impacts.
Karen Kidd with McMaster University in Ontario, Canada. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
The legend behind the silhouette of the NBA logo has died. We take a look back at the Hall of Famer Jerry West's career. You're streaming Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
My family didn't have much, but we have a clear view of the Appalachian Mountains, and I'd settle alone on our front porch and wonder,
If I ever make it to the top of that mountain, what will I see on the other side? Well, I did make it to the other side, and my dreams have come true.
Basketball fans are remembering Jerry West, the Hall of Fame player who was the inspiration for the NBA's logo silhouette. He died Wednesday morning. West was an All-Star in 15 of his seasons with the Los Angeles Lakers. He went on to become an executive for the franchise, where he helped build 2 dynasties across 2 different decades. West was selected for the Basketball Hall of Fame 3 times. He was 86 years old. After a sensational win that made many Americans ask, we have a cricket team? The U.S. men's team suffered defeat at the T20 Cricket World Cup Wednesday. It was top-ranked India that ended the U.S. winning streak, a streak that included an upset over Pakistan last week. A powerhouse team that won the World Cup in 2009 and was the runner-up of the last tournament. The Americans accomplished that despite many of their players holding day jobs when they're not representing the country. But their story isn't over yet. The team has a chance to advance to the next round of the tournament if they can get past Ireland later this week. If you think you have a low spice tolerance, it may be nothing compared to Denmark. The European nation recalled several ramen products from the South Korean company Samyang for being too spicy. Denmark's food agency warned that the level of capsaicin, which gives spicy food its heat, could poison consumers. But Samyang says there's nothing wrong with its ramen and points out no other country has recalled the products. On social media, Denmark is now the target of jokesters, saying Danes just can't handle the heat. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. Russia is gearing up for its first military drills in the Caribbean in 5 years. What exactly it's doing in Cuba and why it's doing it now. Plus, Hamas wants changes to a proposed plan for a ceasefire in Gaza, what they're asking for and how the U.S. is responding. And more consumers are utilizing at-home diagnostic tests. We'll take a look at what's driving the trend and what it means for the future of healthcare. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why? You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there